So the question, I think, was a very interesting question. Tonya and I met over the phone, and we linked up, and I think that there was sort of this simpatico relationship almost immediately established. But this question around whether or not the creative economy, if fundamentally embraced, can change the urban core. Actually, I believe, for me in particular, and I would imagine for Tonya in a little bit, it centers around how the creative economy can be leveraged to increase the exposure, particularly to young people in the urban core, right? So not just fundamentally embracing it to immediately change the urban core right now, which is an incredibly heavy lift, but how far back can we go? Right? To begin to provide exposure, resources, opportunities of empowerment, education to young people, particularly brown and black people, so that they can understand that these are options. Because sometimes the greatest thing that a young person in the urban core can have is options. Right? There's some data that suggests that in 2017, which is the last time I did this research, $4.8 billion of the state economy came from the creative fields, 4.8 billion. 90% of those who contributed to or benefited from that level of flowing resources were white, 90%. 10% were people of color. Now understand that. People of color, not just black people or Hispanic people or people of any other ethnic background, but in totality, people of color. Well, there's a level of injustice there, but I think that's also can be contributed to the fact that there's a lack of exposure and understanding of these options and opportunities. So Tonya, when I have these conversations, particularly with young people, I tend to ask them questions around what their purposes are, what they believe their purposes to be. And typically I get 1 of 5 answers. They either want to be a cosmetologist or barber, beautician. They want to be an athlete, a rapper, right? Or in the medical field, a doctor, nurse, or then in the legal field, Chase, a lawyer. And so, but although all of those are viable options for a career path, they're incredibly limited considering $4.8 billion, and you have fields like musician, music producer, stage manager, right? Broadway actor, right? Like there are options out there that are incredibly expansive. And so when you and I spoke and you talked to me about Memphis Slim House and the origin of Memphis Slim House and the opportunities and exposure that provided for the folks, young people in particular, in the urban core, it began to really click. Like, this is an issue that exists not just in Cincinnati, not just based on my experience, but clearly something that is endemic across the entire country. Tell us a little bit more about Memphis Slim House and how what you're doing specifically addresses the issue of this creative economy and that exposure quotient.
Of course. Like Naima said in the introduction, Memphis Slim House was founded in 2014. It's named after the blues musician Memphis Slim. For those of you who may not be familiar with it, does have a little bit of a Cincinnati connection. A few of his albums his masters from Miracle Records were actually purchased by King Records, and so distributed there. But Memphis Slim, blues musician in the Soulsville neighborhood, or what was typically called South Memphis, because one of the things that I do love to frame is the fact that South Memphis, or that area, was a music-related or a music-centered, very strong, center of Black power during that time, prior to the Stax Museum coming up and prior to the Soulsville name. And so, of course, Memphis Slim, this house, born and raised there. He moved from Memphis to Chicago, kind of following the blues from there, and then became an expatriate and moved from Chicago to Paris. And what we do at the house, of course, is encourage artists to kind of follow that path. not necessarily leaving Memphis, but to think globally in that aspect, again, empowering that creative economy, looking beyond Memphis, looking beyond Shelby County or even Tennessee, beyond the United States and looking at it as a global realm. And one of the things that I really love, again, talking about the creative economy, and not even just framing it in 2019 or even in 1938 when Slim was there, or taking it back further from that, we have a guy named Robert Church who was one of the country's first black millionaires, Memphis's first black millionaire, who basically saved the charter of Memphis after the 1870 yellow fever breakout. And so after that, he had a brilliant idea. He looked at Memphis as what it was. Memphis had always been this Mardi Gras town that brought in money from a lot of the rich landowners and cotton plantations and different things like that from Arkansas. So they came across the river to have fun. They came across the river to be entertained and to spend money in these salons and in these brothels and different things like that were black run and that were managed, and they were being entertained by these black artists. So when Robert Church saved the city's charter by actually being the first to put up a $1,000 bond, which today is about $24,000 in equivalence, he wielded great power, and of course, kind of drew a couple of, green eyes, of course, because of that, because not a lot of people had the money to save the city like he did. So after that, he rethought that whole plan for Memphis and thought, how do we build the Memphis economy around our greatest capital, which is talent? Which is the singing, which is, just the overall entertainment in the service industry and the creative economy, even then. So looking at 100 years ago, we had a black man that had the foresight to even look at the city in that economic sense as far as empowering black people in the things that they were good at. After that. And so, of course, he went on to, save the city's charter. He built a 2,000 person stadium. Now, mind you, this is 1890, right after, of course, Memphis had riots of 1866. We had two major riots of 1866, 1968. Of course, we all know what 1968 is, but 1866 was following the Civil War, because the Union Army had actually taken Memphis at probably around 1862, and we had an influx of runaway slaves that were running to be, to this city. So looking at all of this, the city went from about 3,000 to about 20,000 people within the scope of 5 years. And again, Robert Church was thinking, how do I do what these people are best at? Now, mind you, of course, the blues comes from the Delta. A lot of people were escaping from Mississippi, where the birth of the blues is. So all this talent was running into Memphis for this freedom. He devised a plan to get it. And now fast forward, because of racism, because of segregation and everything that happened within that time during the Jim Crow era, you would see a bit of regression in that. But looking at that, the fact that he was specifically targeted because of his forethought showed that there was power in black entertainment in the city, and still is, and that's what keeps the stronghold. And now you see the Stacks and the High and the different things like that, and of course you've heard the stories from that. But Memphis has always been an extremely talented city prior to those labels, and definitely looking at ways to capitalize on that talent, and again, creating an economy that supplies or that provides or that services what people are good at and enables them to make money off of what they're good at and what they love. And that's some of the things that we teach at Slim House. We empower the artists to, again, giving them the resources that they need to further their career, and not just in studio space or rehearsal space, but also educating them, giving them access to mentorship, to people that are in these industries that can help guide their career so they can make the proper decisions as an artist and see themselves as a viable business versus just an artist. Some people think, oh, I'm just a singer. It's like, no, you are a business. Because if the art wasn't considered a business, you wouldn't see the Scrapple Over Masters, and as far as the ownership of your music, because that's where the real money is. Yeah. So we educate artists to just to be control of their own self, and definitely, just the masters of their fate in their own career in that sense.
That's it. So there's the sweet spot of the thing that really sort of drives me about this whole concept of the creative economy, primarily because everything that we're experiencing in our day-to-day lives, the connective tissue is something that was a problem that was solved through creative means, right? The chair you're sitting in, the shoes you're wearing, somebody designed it.
Right.
The car you're driving, there was a draft of that. Somebody designed that and turned it into something mechanical and so on and so forth. I walked into this room and immediately recognized that the lettering on this building here was Helvetica. That's how my brain works.
Right.
Right. There is something powerful about creative problem solving that, again, the exposure to that begins to, I think, open up the understanding for those who are exposed to it so that they can recognize that even though they may have a particular gift or predilection in a particular area, that's only one part of the total economy, which means that something that they're gifted at can and should be monetized, right? And then they should be able to have ownership in that end product, right? And so when you're thinking about how far down the pipeline that the Memphis Slim House or even other entities that are anchor institutions or supportive institutions in Memphis help to support that. Talk to us a little bit about what those other organizations look like. Is Memphis Slim House partnering with schools, post-secondary and secondary institutions? Who is the audience that comes through? And then ultimately, what have you noticed anecdotally about the impact of what has happened to those individuals as they matriculate through this whole ecosystem?
Memphis Slim House actually, we operate by membership, so we actually service at minimum 400 musicians from the greater Memphis area. So annually, they pay a membership fee to come and be a part of it, and we allow members to join as bands. So at any given point, it can be one person, it can be 12 people, depending on what they're rehearsing for. Again, outside of education and just the access to resources, looking beyond that, once they come in and rehearse, once they put their band together, once they rehearse, once they write their music, what's next? We match them with opportunities, opportunities to get paid in fair and equal opportunities. We don't do short change. We're nonprofit. We don't really fall for that whole, we're a nonprofit, we don't have the money. I don't have any problem with saying, well, probably you should get a DJ instead of a band, instead of hiring, but we really fight for the artists, mainly because it is kind of like a FUBU type of organization where it's for us, by us. It's run by two musicians, myself and then another person who's also a musician, DJ, producer, multiple hat wearer like myself. And so we partner, of course, with our neighborhood entities, right? We're right across the street from Stax Music Academy, which is the Soulsville Foundation campus. They have the Soulsville School, they have the Stax Music Academy, and then, of course, the Stax Museum. And that we've created the backyard series, of course, was spoken about the backyard. And the thing that I love about the backyard, again, it gives opportunities for our members to perform the music that they've crafted and gotten together and get paid for that, as well as serving a dual purpose of providing arts access to the neighborhood, because we are in the 38106, 38126 area code, which is generally high poverty, a lot of vacant lots, similar to a lot of the elements that a lot of you all described in a lot of your cities as well. It's very much the same thing happening in a lot of our cities. And so we do service that area. So we bring in and we partner with other organizations like Haile Theater, which is the city's Black repertory theater, like Opera Memphis, and so many other arts organizations to bring them into the neighborhood. Because one of the biggest things is that a lot of people can't access the art, one, because they can't afford it, two, because there are insecurities around attending something that you've never attended. And a lot of times, especially in opera and a lot of what we call high-class theater, a lot of people of color, or just Black people in general, specifically for the neighborhood, don't feel welcome in those type of environments, even though they see people that look like them walking into these venues, cause just a lot of nervousness. And even with myself having that exposure, sometimes I feel very uncomfortable being a Black woman, being in a lot of those spaces. So we work to bring that into the neighborhood, to strip away a lot of that comes along with it, as far as how will I get there. A lot of our neighbors are bus riders. Riding out to an area called Germantown from our neighborhood is at least an hour ride on the bus alone. Most people can't afford an Uber drive. It's about 27 minutes. That's about $25 or more dollars. Once you figure out how to get there, you have to figure out how you and your children are actually going to get in. And before you get there, what are we going to wear? I don't have a tuxedo. I don't have a formal gown. So we put this space in the backyard so where people can wear whatever, whatever you wear in your normal backyard, unless you're naked in your backyard. We're going to put that out there. People do what they want. It's your space. You do what you want. But in our backyard, we ask you.
No judgment.
Yeah. So T-shirt, shorts, whatever you would wear that makes you comfortable. You are welcome to the backyard to experience this art in a place that you're comfortable with, to be able to have that access. So that's just a few of the things that we do. And like I said, we get artists from the greater Memphis area. We also partner with people like the Downtown Memphis Commission and like the Riverfront Development Corporation, which is all the downtown area, to make sure to bring a little bit of Soulsville into the downtown area, because I believe that downtown spaces are everyone's spaces and not necessarily a neighborhood of its own, because it's a tourist central. Everyone stays there.
Central
People
business
go
district.
there first. So what better way to get experience to the real Memphis culture, Black culture that is in our city, by placing these concerts in this area. And in turn, we book Memphis Slim artists. So again, getting paid, getting exposure. They're getting to meet people from other cities, which is in turn giving them opportunities to move forward. And so that's just our mini contribution to the creative economy in the city, which is something that is definitely growing. And there's so many other organizations that actually lend towards that as well.
Yeah, so here in Cincinnati, so I work for Arts Wave, as was mentioned, and there's we have this infrastructure, these guiding principles. It's called the blueprint for collective action, right? So this blueprint is designed in theory and in practice to touch on these very key indicators, and all of them are connected to this whole idea of exposing people who have traditionally not had access to having greater access, right? And so, you're talking about stuff like enlivening neighborhoods, right? How the arts can be leveraged to enliven neighborhoods, how the arts can be leveraged to in art education, so to fuel creativity and learning, right? To bridge cultural divides, to create the kind of empathy that creates conversation, right, across cultures, right? That's 3 of the 5, but so when you're talking about breaking down barriers, it becomes incumbent upon all of the arts organizations, particularly the ones that we fund, but I think it becomes incumbent upon all of the arts organizations across America to do what Nina Simon says in a book called The Art of Relevance, to become relevant, right? To make sure that what is being created is specifically for the folks that live in the community, and removes that era of exclusivity, right? So that you understand that the arts in and of themselves have that ability to be universal, regardless of whether or not historically the art form has been traditionally white, Western, European art, right? We can mash up some stuff, right? We can create hybrids. We can create, we can P. Diddy remix it. You know what I mean, right? We have that capacity, we have that ability, and we have that responsibility, particularly if you're looking at changing the urban core. And so to revert back to that focus, this is why this is important to me. So I grew up in this community. I grew up a 7-minute walk from here on Finley Street, 819 Finley Street. And my grandmother had the brilliant foresight. I was in a house full of women, and I don't speak the language. I'm sorry, I needed a translator. So Granny had the foresight to send me 3 blocks down the road to Lynn Street, where there was an organization called the Arts Consortium. And the Arts Consortium was right? So the Arts Consortium was a creation of Robert O'Neill and several other key community figures, and the intent was to have that level of exposure, particularly for people in the urban core. And so I walk into there and I get exposed to African Americans, ballet dancers on point, right? I'm 7, right? I didn't even know this was a thing, right? My world existed around the Super Friends and Spider-Man, right? You know what I mean? So to see African American on point, and then you see like paintings, right, created. I'm a visual artist, so all of this was incredibly stimulating. And then I learned to play the piano, and then learned to play the cello, and then I matriculated from that to to the School for the Creative and Performing Arts, and then subsequently to the Art Academy. But in the midst of all of that, there was a whole lot of fear and doubt, right?
Yeah.
Because in all of my experiences at the Symphony, at the Art Museum, at any other major art venue, there was no representation.
Right.
There was no reflection of me, right? So I chose a whole lot of careers, and I've had several jobs. I've had several of them at the same time. I'm not Jamaican, but it was I was juggling a lot of stuff, right? And so, but the fear was that somehow or another, this wasn't viable, right? A career in the arts wasn't viable, right? So now I'm 46, and I get this wonderful opportunity to work for the oldest United Arts organization in the entire country, the largest funder in the entire country. So this is my first a foyer into a complete art career. But I'm at this stage in my career because all before then, the exposure to all of this was not prominent in my life, right? And so because it's not prominent early enough, then you begin to choose things that are pragmatic and practical, because you don't want to be what they call a starving artist, right? The reality is, though, if all of this connective tissue is based on some creative thinking, some creative problem solving in every different facet of creative problem solving, then there's probably little that you can do that would allow you to be a starving artist, right? There is an economy around it, but what we have to be diligent about is not only exposing young people, particularly young people of color, far down this pipeline to the arts, but the business of art, right? The business of art. So what does it ultimately mean to brand yourself, to market your product, right? To understand that there is necessary market research. Every product that needs to be delivered, from cars to shoes to so on and so forth, there was a team of individuals that were skilled in those particular areas and created those kinds of strategies, right?
Exactly.
But for these individual young people, right, for whom those resources may not be available, then we have to be able to create the kinds of resources that allow them to have access to that knowledge capital that some of our other colleagues spoke of earlier, right? That political capital, those relational capital, before they're able to then access grant funding or other kinds of capital to stand up what it is they're trying to stand up. So the question, my final question for you is, how are you establishing at Memphis Slim House those other kinds of resources to help with marketing and branding and helping them to promote their story and their product?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that question. I was looking for. I really wanted to tell you about this one thing, as I would be remiss if I did not mention one of the things that I consider my shining jewels as far as be able to create something within that neighborhood, which is the Soulsville USA Festival. And when in creating that festival, I wanted to build a festival or build a celebration around the South Memphis neighborhood that was up to par with a lot of the other neighborhoods, more majority white neighborhoods, where people deemed it being safer or, just a better attraction, making more, open for more people to come to that neighborhood and feel safe, basically. So a lot of people questioned me about it. And in trying to pull together that team, I had a lot of questions and a lot of doubt coming from adults. And I was like, you know what? I will get kids. So I built a crew of kids from the neighborhood, because who better than to teach the history of the neighborhood than the people that actually live there? That way they can take ownership in something. So not only do they know, get the history of the neighborhood as we work with everything, they get to know the major players. I would drag them to all of the meetings with me so they got to meet the other executive directors of the organizations. Now, mind you, these are organizations that they typically would stay out of because they're like, I don't feel welcome. But now they know the ED. They can, and they know them. So they see them walking down the street. They call them by the first name and say, hello, how are you? And that type of thing. Now they can walk in these spaces and they feel proud because now they feel ownership in something. They feel like people know them by name and also know what they can do. So give them a time to shine. Those kids know the festival more than I do. And I tell everyone, grown people, old people, everyone. This kid is my secondary person. If you can't find me, ask him or her, because they know everything you need to know. And it's been times that I had to check adults who were like, well, I didn't want to answer. I was like, well, who else are you going to get the information from? They know it. You don't. Go with what I told you to go with. Yeah. And I fight for those kids because they know. Yeah. And that's the thing. The only thing they ever needed was a chance. Yes. And that's the only thing they ever needed was a chance. And that's the only thing that we as Black people ever needed was an opportunity to be ourselves and to really unfold and blossom as what we were intended to be. Yeah. So watching these kids interact with the neighborhood and be able to have something in control to where they feel like, yeah, I know that, or I can answer this question and do that, you should see the light. Yeah. That comes out of them, and just it shines from that point. And I've watched the kids, the different interns throughout the years, become so much other things. Prime example, I have an intern by the name of Peyton, who during a time, he came over to us when he was 16 years old. Somewhat, because of the neighborhood, it is the quote unquote hood. It's a lot of negative things that are happening in the neighborhood. So he was oftentimes negatively influenced by the things, but it's such a gang-ridden, different area. It's like those influences, especially for a young Black man, are kind of tough, because a lot of times you don't have those options to tell people no in those cases. But watching Peyton actually go from a 16-year-old just total knucklehead to actually and he's our resident artist now. He's graduated from school, and that's one of the programs that we actually captured, because I wanted the teenage boys specifically, the ones that make beats all the time, the one that sit and rap, that didn't feel like college was a place for them at the moment. So Peyton is 19 years old, decided not to go to college, but I still gave him a resident, thing, and he was like, isn't this for college people? I was like, no, it's for whoever applies and whoever can qualify. But watching Peyton step up to that responsibility, and having him and giving him that studio time to where he can bring in other people from the neighborhood. So I hear him correcting them, like, man, take your feet off that table, man. It's like, we ain't got money like that, man. And that type of thing, like actually hearing him. So I sit in the office and listen to him and how he relates to them. Or he tells them, like, yeah, I'm registered with BMI. And they're like, what's that? And he'll go and pull up on the computer. I'm hearing him educate his peers. Yeah. And then it's just helping him helped us to cast this net to help so many others who we probably wouldn't have been able to reach, because they're like, oh, Miss Tonya is like an auntie. I'm not coming around there. She's going to tell me what to do or whatever. And it's like being able to work through him and watching him interact with them. And now, knowing that Peyton is producing music, he's helping to manage the studio, he's getting paid, he's teaching his peers. A lot of the guys who are also escaping their negative neighborhoods, now they come over to the studio. 9 o'clock on a Friday night, I get a text saying, hey, Miss Tonya, can we come to the studio because there's some stuff happening on our block? We may be there until like 2 or 3 when it settles down. Like, perfectly fine. Because that type of stuff, I don't mind paying a more expensive light bill as long as I know that the teenagers and the teens that need access to these services have a safe space to come. Yeah. And what better place to come to make music, because that's what they do. And I believe that eventually them having this access and this them surrounded by people, because they also have mentorship, because they're always there. A lot of the musicians that come in and out of town know them. They've been able to produce for the radio station. They've been able to make tracks for people that came in. It's so many opportunities that they've been afforded just by being able to be present and be around those people that can give them the opportunity that typically they wouldn't have been able to do. Yeah.
It's awesome. Brilliant.
Thank you.
Tonya, thank you very much. And thank you all for listening.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.